All right, and it looks like actually we got a pretty good crew who are logged in now. So I will jump right into it. I'll start by introducing myself. My name is Mitch Ramsey. I'm a junior faculty at Ohio State, and I'm the chair of the CAPER Young Investigator Committee. And I'll talk a little bit about CAPER, and then I'll tell you a little bit more about the Young Investigator Committee on the next slide. CAPER is an acronym that stands for the Collaborative Alliance for Pancreas Education and Research, and has a mission to really kind of raise the field of pancreas research and also kind of pancreas related clinical care. And although our session tonight is really going to be about the GI and the therapeutic endoscopy side of thing, there are also folks involved with CAPER who are on the pancreas surgery side, and also some endocrinologists who are interested in the endocrine, exocrine pancreas crosstalk. So although tonight's going to be a GI focus, it's not just a GI society, but it's all about the pancreas and trying to improve the pancreatic care across the country. The Young Investigator Group is sort of one branch of that mission, and our goal is to kind of extend that down into folks who are still in training, whether that be fellows or residents or even some medical students who are on tonight. And so our goal with the committee is to provide a forum to get some young investigators who are being very successful in pancreas. So for example, our next month's meeting, which will be December 8th at 7 p.m. virtually, of course, we'll have Dr. Anna Evans-Phillips from the University of Pittsburgh. She just got an NIH R01 for her work on pain processing and chronic pancreatitis. And she'll just be sharing some tips about sort of how to navigate the fellow to faculty transition and talking a little bit about how to pursue a very specific research interest. And then our next meeting in January, on January 12th at 7 p.m., also virtually, we'll be talking hopefully for about a half hour about some research methodology, whether that be big data or systematic reviews. And then we'll move into the last half where we'll talk about maybe some project proposals where, let's say you're working on a project and you're kind of at a stopping point or there's a stumbling block, pitch it to the group and kind of get a sense from some of the other young investigators on the call, what we might do to solve that problem or what we might do to kind of help you with the project. So now that you guys have signed up for this email, signed up for this event, you're also signed up for the Young Investigator emails. So be on the watch for a couple of emails about these upcoming events. The last little bit of orientation tonight before we jump into the content will be a very brief overview of GI training. And I'll say that the traditional route to becoming a gastroenterologist involves completing an internal medicine residency, which is 3 years, followed by a general GI fellowship, which is 3 years. Some folks will decide to pursue a post-GI fellowship, advanced fellowship. One of those is the advanced endoscopy or therapeutic endoscopy, but also include transplant hepatology or inflammatory bowel disease. So a number of those can be completed during the 3rd year of your GI fellowship, but are often require a 4th year. The last thing to mention, there was a specific question about some of these pre-fellowship options. And they are out there where you can complete an internal medicine residency and then do sort of one of these unaccredited pre-fellowships, which is either like GI hospitalist or nutrition or hepatology. I would say those are very program specific. And if that's something that you're interested in, I would recommend talking with your internal medicine program director and reaching out to the program directors at institutions that offer this. But for the majority of our discussion tonight, we're going to be talking about the traditional path, internal medicine, straight to general GI fellowship. And we may talk a little bit also about candidacy for some of the advanced fellowships as well. So with that, I would like to turn it over to our attending panelists to maybe just give a kind of a 1 or 2 lines about yourself, where you work now, give us an overview to some of the hats that you wear, and then give us your kind of elevator pitch. If you're stuck in an elevator with a medical student or a resident who says, how do I match into GI fellowship? Or what makes a strong applicant? What are some of the kind of the standard tips or advice that you give to someone like that? And we'll go alphabetically if that's okay. So I'd like to start with Dr. Chahal.
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much, Dr. Ramsey, for giving me the opportunity, and Dr. Peter Lee. I'm Prableen Chahal. I'm an advanced endoscopist at Cleveland Clinic, and I'm the program director for Advanced Endoscopy Fellowship. That's the one hat I wear. I enjoy education and enjoy teaching. I would like to think, a robust clinical research portfolio. I am not a funded researcher like NIH R01, but I've had the privilege of industry grants and smaller intramural grants. So that's me. And you want me to take a stab at the first question, Mitch, or are we going introductions first?
No, go ahead. Give us a stab at the first question.
Okay. What makes a good fellowship candidate? I thought about it. I'm involved in the GI Fellowship Review Committee. We do interview every year. I'm part of the panel. And I think when we are looking at the application and when we are interviewing candidates, few of the things that we look for and we think help residents match into fellowship. Number one, I think most important is a mentor. I think it's very important to identify a mentor who will be there to help support you, not your scholarly activity, but help guide you for your personal and professional growth. I personally take a mentorship as a lifelong relationship. It's not just, during your residency or once you're matched, you're done. I consider this as a lifelong collaboration. So find a mentor who will be there with you throughout this journey and open the doors for you. Second thing that I really find, apart from the scholarly activities, which I think is very critical, which not only includes, one main project that you're involved with, but, how well do you utilize time in terms of, other smaller projects you have had opportunity to write review, article, case report, case series, video, etc., but also smaller grants. I think some of like CAPER, ACG, et cetera, they give small travel grants. So that just shows us the initiative that you guys are taking and the passion and dedication for that you're going in and looking for these things. Third, I would say the uniqueness of a candidate. One of my dear colleagues now, when she was interviewing with us for GI Fellowship, I still distinctly remember 7-8 years ago, she presented the idea of working specifically with liver patients in the ICU and opening an intensive care unit for liver patients. To me, I was blown away with that idea because it was so unique at that time. And guess what? She not only matched to our program, she took that idea, brought to fruition, and now we have a medical ICU for liver patients. So, if not everybody can come up with these unique ideas, but I think when you have some unique project, your experience that sets you aside, you come in with a novel idea that helps. Building a brand, we can talk about it later, social media, emotional intelligence, interpersonal skills, etc. And then finally, letter of recommendations. Ask people who really know you well and they can personalize the letters and it's not just some generic letter that people can write for you. And just make sure you go out, put yourself out there for clinical rotations, get to know people in GI world in the clinics, and outpatient clinics, inpatient consult rotations, etc. So the more people you get to meet, they know about you, you learn from them, it helps with your growth. So I'll stop there.
Great, thank you very much. Those were great tips. Next, we'll go to Dr. Chawla. If you just want to give your kind of one-liner about yourself, and then hop into answering these questions.
Yeah, hey, hello everyone, and thank you, Mitch and Dr. Lee for inviting me. So my name is Saurabh Chawla. I'm like Dr. Chahal, I'm a therapeutic endoscopist, and I am at Emory in Atlanta. I am the program director for the General GI Fellowship here, and I've been on staff here for close to 10 years. So the elevator pitch on what makes a good GI Fellowship candidate is it's a little difficult because different candidates are coming from different backgrounds. But one thing overwhelmingly I would say is that you have to have a sincere interest in doing GI Fellowship. It shouldn't be something that you're considering as option A, and then you have an option B and an option C. You have to go into this wholeheartedly. And as Dr. Chahal was saying, and then demonstrate your passion and your commitment to doing it. And I think that will come through in your packet, and packets will be different for different people coming from different backgrounds. So that's my single line on what makes a good GI fellowship candidate. Mitch, do you want me to go on to the next question? So how do you want to do it?
That's awesome. We'll have some round robin on the next page.
Okay.
So we'll move right on to Dr. Gardner. If you just want to give a one-liner about yourself and then your elevator pitch for kind of what should we do to match into GI fellowship?
Hi, everybody. Tim Gardner, part-time therapeutic endoscopist, medical pancreatologist, and I'm the program director at Dartmouth for the General GI Fellowship, as well as the assistant director for the Therapeutic Endoscopy Fellowship. So we're in the midst of interview season. Our rank lists are due next week, I believe. I hope I get that right and don't miss it. But I think the most important thing, I think, is that you show interest in the programs to which you've applied. And I know that sounds simple, but I think as we get closer and as we get further and further along, you're going to see this whole issue of signaling. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with that term, but signaling is the term that is being used now in many residency programs. I don't think it's gotten to fellowship programs yet, but basically signaling about the type of program that you want. Okay, so by that I mean we're a very rural environment where I practiced up at Dartmouth Hitchcock in the north. Okay, if someone applies to our fellowship program from, say, Los Angeles and has never been here, has never signaled any sort of interest, never said, I want to work in a rural environment, never anything like that, then we don't take their application as seriously. And so I think it's really important as you apply to places and you think about where you'd like to go, when you decide where you want to go, and it might be hard to do that, that you really let the programs know how interested you are. And that's going to, I think, be more formalized in the application process in the next few years. But the whole idea of signaling, I think, is really, really important. And I make that point very, very specifically with the applicants who we bring in for interview. I say, if you want to come here, let me know. And that could be tricky because maybe you don't, but I think it's really, really important that you identify. And then just another quick thing that I think is really important, do your homework when you apply. Like when you go to interview at Ohio State, you need to know who Phil Hart is, right? You need to know who George Papachristou is, Mitch Ramsey. Like you have to know exactly who those people are and what they've done. And that'll really, really help you. And sometimes I get people come in and they interview at Dartmouth, they don't know who Corey Siegel is, right? Who's our section chief and an IBD legend, right? And I'm like, that's kind of weird. It doesn't mean that you really, wanted to come here. So those would be my two pieces of advice: signal, and when you apply and interview at places, make sure you know who you're interviewing with.
And I'll ask you a follow-up question. For some people may be intimidated to hear, oh man, Ohio State has 35 gastroenterologists. How am I supposed to know them all? Is that something that's provided to applicants before the interview?
Yeah, I mean, at least when we do interviews, and I don't know how it is down at Emory, Dr. Shala, but we let the applicants know who they're interviewing with before they show up. So when you get an interview and you see who you're interviewing with, at minimum, go through their PubMed and make sure you see that and ask questions specific, to that environment in which you're applying. I think that's really, really important. And it can be hard because you're interviewing at multiple different places and it takes effort. But I think that really signals a lot that you're interested in the program.
Yeah. On a later slide, we'll ask the current fellows to talk a little bit about how they prepared for their interviews specifically. And so we'll come back to that thought. But last, I'd like to have Dr. Glessing, if you give us a one-liner about yourself and give us your soapbox pitch about applying to fellowship.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. Thank you again for inviting me to be a part of this. My name is Brooke Glessing. I'm an advanced endoscopist as well. I am at University Hospital's Case Western in Cleveland. I've been here for about 9 years, and I wear a few hats, but one of them is the Associate Program Director for the General GI Fellowship, and I'm also part of the Fellowship Committee for the Advanced Fellowship group, and I also am the Medical Director of Endoscopy. And I have a lot, I echo what everyone else has said. I think these are all really, really good points. Kind of when thinking about what my elevator pitch is, I think there's a lot of things that we can say that's, our standard as far as what makes a strong applicant. But, each program, to kind of Dr. Gardner's point, is looking for very specific things. So I do echo what he was saying about really know know where you're applying, but I think even more so, know yourself. I think that that is really important, to really be honest with yourself when you're looking at, you know, what it is about GI that excites you, what it is about the field that makes you want to do it. And then you know, I know it's hard because you haven't actually started GI, but when you're thinking about what it is about the field that makes you want to do it, I think be really honest about yourself, or to yourself, as far as when you're looking for what fellowship to apply to. The other thing that I think is really important is to kind of look at your application, maybe through different eyes, maybe have someone else look at kind of your CV and try to help create a story for yourself, as far as, you know, not everyone went directly from undergraduate to medical school. Like, what was that gap year for? What did you do? Why did you do it? How did that make you a better person? And then going from, you know, medical school into residency, and then residency into fellowship. I think one of the things I sometimes see for really interesting applicants is that they've done a lot of things. They're very interesting people. And I'm trying to figure out, why did they change from one field to another, from one interest to another? Is it because they didn't know what they want? Are they still searching? Or was there something about something that they were doing that then, you know, inspire them to look at GI or to look at some other field? And then my last thing is, if you're doing research, which I think is really important, I think everyone would probably agree that that is pretty standard for a GI fellowship. One of the things that I think is really important is that you have follow through. So if you're presenting at conferences, if you're doing posters, make sure that those end up becoming publications, or at least have the intention to have that follow through. I think that that is really important. We see a lot of applicants that think that it's most important to just have a number, and, you know, multiple case reports, multiple posters without any progression. I think sometimes can make your application look a little bit not genuine, if that makes sense. It's kind of a long elevator pitch, sorry.
No, that's great. There's a lot that goes into successfully matriculating GI fellowship. So it's good to know that the program directors are looking at a lot of things too. It's not just, you know, their MCAT score or something like that. I'd like to go next to have our fellow panelists talk a little bit about mentorship. I like that Dr. Chahal brought that up. And we'll just go also alphabetically and have each of our fellows kind of introduce themselves, where they did their residency, where they're at in fellowship, and talk a little bit about mentorship, how you found a mentor, and what that relationship looks like today. We'll go alphabetically. So Dr. Gurakar, if your microphone's all set up, we'd love to hear from you first.
Sure. Hi there. I'm Hervé. I'm a first-year fellow at Hopkins. I did my residency training here as well. I was not a medical student here, but I had actually spent a year here doing an MPH during medical school, so I had the opportunity to meet some mentors then. I think, you know, one of the most important ways to find a mentor is to talk to people who have worked with those mentors. So I remember I spent a lot of time talking to other students, you know, medical students, and to other residents, and even the fellows that had worked with those particular mentors, to really figure out who would be a good mentor. I think it's important to find someone who's responsive. You know, when you email them, are they going to email you back 3 months later, or, you know, the next day? And then also looking at how productive they've been with their research mentees. So is this someone that has been working with, you know, a particular mentee for 3 years, and, you know, this mentee has still not been able to, you know, bring any project to fruition? Or is this a mentee, or is this a research mentor with which, you know, that this particular student or resident has had a very productive time and has been able to, you know, produce 10 papers with them, and, you know, and look at the journals that they've been able to produce in. So I think those are two very important aspects. And I think if you talk to people that have worked with those mentors before, that will really give you a good sense. I remember I actually had it narrowed down to 2 people, and you know, one of them, the topic area was slightly more of interest at the time, but then, you know, I talked to one of the students that had worked with the other mentor that maybe I was less interested in the topic area, but he said, no, you absolutely have to work with this mentor. He's the absolute best mentor. And when you hear something like that, I was like, okay, this is how I'm going to choose who to work with. And I was so happy that I ended up choosing that person. So I think kind of do your homework before you even approach a mentor by speaking to other people. and looking at their track record with mentees, and I think that will take you far.
Thank you. That's great advice, and I'll echo that in my own personal experience. When you get connected with a mentor, even if it's in an area that you don't think you're going to love, just by working with someone that you work well with, you'll find a passion for research, and you'll find yourself kind of deeper and deeper into that specific field. So that's great advice to choose a mentor. Don't choose a project necessarily. The next person up would be Dr. Firkins.
Yeah, hey everybody, and thanks for having me. So I am a first-year fellow at Cleveland Clinic. I did my residency at Ohio State, and I would agree that I think, echoing what's been said already, that mentorship is probably the single most important thing that you can do to prepare to be a good candidate, because that's really, it's the gateway to the research that that everybody worries about having. It's sort of the gateway to your good letters, and then there's a little bit of knowing people as well. But I think finding that good mentor early, what I did is I knew I wanted to do GI very early on. So I went and sought out first older residents who were working with certain mentors and asked them who would be good to talk with, as well as some of the fellows. And then things that is probably at least a variation at most institutions is research meetings. So at Ohio State, every month there was a research meeting where it was kind of a meeting of the minds, where ideas were tossed around, where there are updates on certain projects, and really just a collaborative meeting. And that's where a lot of the folks who are interested in research and mentorship particular would be. And so I went and introduced myself. I kind of had an idea of who I wanted to talk to and potentially be a mentor. So putting yourself out there with these research meetings, or even something like this, like CAPER, is a great step as well. Looking at maybe like one of these questions here, I guess, how much research is considered safe? I don't know that there's really an answer to that. I think there's an unsafe level of research that is like zero. But I think what's been kind of said before is showing that you follow through with the research that that you do partake in, and showing a genuine interest in what you're doing, and that comes off, I think, palpably when you do your interviews.
Yeah, great advice. And last but not least, Dr. Pusateri.
Thank you so much again for having me. Hi, everyone. I'm Antoinette Pusateri. I'm a second-year GI fellow at Ohio State. I actually did my medical school and residency training here as well, and did undergraduate at the University of Notre Dame. When I've thought about kind of my research and mentorship, kind of three pearls, and again, definitely echo what those prior to me said. But I think first, depending on who, it sounds like a lot of the audience is kind of med students and residents, but part of it is just that one, like, how do you get your first step into GI and into GI research, and even knowing what types of research. When I first started at Notre Dame, I actually knew I wanted to do GI then, and where I was, it was very basic science and kind of lab heavy, kind of the different mentors that we had there. And so I said, great, I've never done research before, so let's just get started. And I was lucky to get a position in a lab doing inflammatory bowel research in mice. And so then having that mentor, he taught me obviously what I needed to know in that realm, but then said there's other different types of research. There's different clinical research, and that got me an opportunity then to research at our Nationwide Children's Hospital, which is our pediatric affiliated hospital here, and kind of more clinical research. And I realized that that's kind of where my heart was the happiest in. And so so pearl one is just, kind of knowing that there's different types of research that exist, and kind of learning that options from your mentors. Second, I think what was mentioned earlier about, who are you going to work with the best in terms of mentors? And one of my mentors, who happened to be in IBD, and that's the field that I will be going into, I was really excited because one of our first meetings, she asked me, what question do you want to ask? And what's your heart interested and your mind interested in learning? And, thus far, especially, and that was in residency, And, you know, at that point, I felt like a lot of it had just been, this is what it is. This is what we're doing. This is your role. And you need that at some point in your training for sure to learn the methodology, to get that experience. But when she said, what do you want to ask? And I'm like, that's why I went into medicine. That's why we went into science, right? Like we get to ask questions and design something and really learn from it and help someone. So I really like that. So that was just the Pearl 2, was just maybe, you know, see who asks you that question and who you really gel with. And then my Pearl 3 is also, has kind of been mentioned that when you are selecting your research and your mentors, you know, doesn't necessarily, especially when we're talking about GI, maybe it doesn't necessarily have to be, if you in your heart know, you know, you want to be a pancreatologist, but then maybe an opportunity for something different comes on in hepatology kind of earlier on in your you know, med school or residency experience. You know, if again, the mentorship connection feels like supportive and exciting to you, then maybe go for it, you know? So don't feel like you can only be a hepatologist if you do first year residency, you do a hepatology project. So that would be my third Pearl.
Awesome. I really like what you say about over time, trying out different mentors in different areas, getting a sense of what you like. And then eventually there'll come a point when you get to start choosing your own projects that you're interested in, asking your own questions. And it won't happen overnight, but as you kind of develop a line of inquiry and you sort of acquire some new skills, learn from different mentors over time, now you get to apply them to the questions that you want. So I'll turn this one over to Dr. Gardner and Dr. Chawla. When you look at applications, is there a number where you say, you know, how many publications does this candidate need to get a look or to get their foot in the door? Is there a number for that, or kind of what's your take?
Probably, do you want to take that or you want me to take it?
Oh, I thought he asked Saurabh that question, so.
That's okay, anyone.
Yeah, I can start on this. And this is a question that, you know, it comes up every year and we think long and hard about it. And it's more relevant now because there's so many journals out there which will publish a lot of things. So we do get applicants who have, you know, a whole page full of peer-reviewed publications, but, you know, obviously you can look at the journals and see the relevance of them, etc. So there is no safe number. And as Steve said, there is an unsafe number, which is demonstrating that you've not done any research, which in certain circumstances can also be okay, but most of the times that's definitely something that, you know, makes your packet go down in the bottom of the list. But but, you know, essentially, no. If you have one good publication where you are the first author and it's something which clearly looking at it and reading it, or, you know, just reading the title suggests that you've put effort in it, that to me is enough if, you know, other things match with our program to invite you for an interview and have a discussion.
Yeah, I would echo that as well. I think one of the things that I like to do is ask the applicants about their research when they interview. And so if you have you know, multiple different projects, my pet peeve is the 40 meta-analyses, you know, that come in. Like I get it, meta-analysis that's done in a weekend. Like I understand those programs. Like that's not what we want. In fact, I think that's probably harmful to the application, to be honest with you. I think, you know, it's hard when you're a resident or a medical student or early in your fellowship to identify sometimes where you want your career to go and what you want to focus in on. But you'd like to see some broad general themes. And I think, you know, having less, more high quality publications, as has been said, is really the way to go. And so, again, I think the finishing it to completion is important. We really want to see manuscripts. And again, the one thing I wouldn't do is do 40 meta-analyses and you know, put that on your CV. That's actually kind of harmful.
Great. Is there a way for an application to shine? Let's say there's, you know, unfortunately they didn't find a mentor and don't have any publications. How do you, I guess, make up for that in other aspects of the application?
So I can answer that question. I think there's, that's where I think, first of all, analyzing a little bit about yourself comes into play. Not everybody can be gung-ho about research. I do agree and believe that some amount of research productivity is important for a strong application. But you may be one who's interested in education. So if that's the case, what have you done to improve or hone your skills in education? Did you take courses? Did you attend anything that your institution offers? Did you educate yourself along that line? Did you install anything new within your program, laid out new programs? Or I noticed application from some of the applicants early on in the COVID, they started the crisis program, which was really very helpful. So that's what I mentioned, the uniqueness factor in your application. Doesn't necessarily have to be the publications that you brought on. Building your own brand. You are somebody who launched a really novel, innovative social media product or educational platform. You are somebody who came up with an app. You're somebody who worked in some sort of innovation or device. So there are a whole bunch of other avenues. You have to see what you enjoy and like, what you're passionate about, and what did you do to bring that to light.
That's great. So those are maybe some educational products, might be a non-peer-reviewed work, for example, that still shows a focused interest, kind of pursuing a specific thing in a career. What are your takes on social media products, like running medicine Twitter or a podcast or something like that? Dr. Glessing, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm probably the least social media savvy of the group, even though I'm fairly young. But I think that to Dr. Shahal's point, I mean, I think if that's something that you feel passionate about, and that's something that, that does, take a lot of time investment to do that. And so I think if that's something that, a resident is really passionate about, and that's what they want to spend their time on, it does take oftentimes a lot of research to do that, and to be able to be relevant on social media. So I think that that's fine. One of the things I think is really important, and I mean, it probably goes without being said, as far as what makes a really good candidate, is that you have to be a really good resident. So there, a lot of times I've seen residents be so focused on maybe research, or so focused on, coming to GI conferences, that they're actually leaving their current, rotations to do that, to get FaceTime with GI physicians. And that's not okay. And that's not being a team player, and that's not being a good resident. And so I'm kind of going off script, but if you want to create some social media product and be the headliner for that, I think that that's great, but that should not be taking you away from patient care. That shouldn't be taking you away from your day-to-day duties, and that really shouldn't be maybe your primary focus. But that's kind of my take on it. But I'm also not really a social media person, but I do think that social media is kind of really important for fellowships and for GI. So I'm a big fan of it, but I don't do it myself.
Any other panelists want to take a stab at that one? I have no idea myself. I'm curious. No one asked, only me.
So I can say, Mitch, I was one of the people up until 2 years ago, I was anti-social media. But our institution, they sort of twist your arm that you have to go on social media, and honestly, I think my take over 2 years is it is helpful. I mean, I think bottom line depends on what you want to use it for. If you're using it as an educational platform, network, collaborate, get yourself out there, I think it's stellar. A lot of my research projects, they came about just because of me being on Twitter. It also gives an opportunity to showcase what you have done, also learn what the other people are doing, and also to give a shout out to your colleagues who are doing a great job. And also as an applicant, if I know somebody is on the social media, you can put a face to the name. So when you're actually applying to the program, does it give a little bit of an undue advantage? Maybe, like if I've seen somebody on the social media, I know them, I've seen their work, and now I see their application and I'm talking to them. There's a little bit more of familiarity that gets built in. So maybe there's a little bit of a bias related to that. And then there are sort of, so many recent educational products that were launched on social media that are huge success, and a lot of publications that come out of those products. I don't know if, I would want to name, I'm not, endorsing that, but they're fantastic, like in the IBD realm, endoscopy realm, journal clubs, they are fantastic, I think. And you learn a lot from them. So bottom line, I do tell the trainees who are working with me to join social media. I mean, you don't want to tweet out what you're eating and where you're going. You don't want to be spending your entire time there, but use it as an educational platform and a sort of an advertisement and learning opportunity.
Yeah. You had also talked in your elevator pitch about, in terms of publications, one of the things you mentioned was having some videos.
Yeah.
And I imagine, especially in the field of therapeutic endoscopists, that's something that we look for in a candidate for a therapeutic fellowship, because that is sort of part of the field, to show what you've done and show some fluency in video editing. Do you think that's a skill that medical students can start to acquire, or residents, or you think that's just for endoscopists?
Oh, no, not at all. I would say that's something that even medical students can acquire. If you look at the presentations now, when I go to all these conferences, even the PowerPoint presentations are so fancy. They have animation, the video editing is just out of this world. And I'm like, oh my God, I have so much to learn. So yes, I don't think it's early if they start in the medical school. I mean, a GI is such a visual field. And if you have that opportunity to learn early on, I think you can use it in your presentations, not only just your video publications.
Great. I'm going to move on to the next.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to make a comment. And, the one thing that I wanted to emphasize on what Dr. Chahal said about social media is, as you would have probably seen, she talked about presenting your work on social media. Social media cannot be your work. So you have to do something rather than just, being on social media. Because I say this with caution because, first of all, Emory has a great social media presence, and our fellows are doing a great educational thing on social media called Embroid Digest, and they also do a podcast. But social media can also lead to stress, anxiety, and burnout. So as residents, you need to be aware of how to use it judiciously, and your use of it may be different from an expert who's out there. So please be cautious about how you use social media is my only thing. Don't make it the be all end all of your track to a fellowship. So if you do have time, use that to network, use that to present your research, use that to do research. But just being on social media and following a bunch of program directors doesn't get you much.
So in other words, you're saying that if you have 10,000 followers on Twitter, that's not impressive enough, if that's your only accomplishment. And I agree with that.
Great. That's a great balance to it. So I'll switch gears a little bit and ask if you guys have advice for maybe candidates who are coming from a healthcare system without GI fellowship, whether that's a community program here in the States or whether that's an international program.
I can take that. I mean, I think it would be not genuine to say it is harder when you're coming from a community program or an international graduate. I mean, I think it is harder. There's a higher bar. And I think it just makes all the things that we're saying much more important. And I guess that, it's not fair, but I think it does. I mean, I think if you're at a community program, it doesn't mean that you can't do research, but maybe you want to think about trying to find like a fellowship that you'd be very interested in doing an away elective there, or reaching out to a program director there or some of the researchers there and say, hey, can I come do research? Or I've had many people do that with me from other institutions. So, I think it's just important to recognize that it is a little bit of a higher bar. It shouldn't be, but it is. And so I think it just requires a little bit more. I keep coming back to the signaling, but I think signaling is important, and I think signaling is helpful. And again, you may get ghosted. I think that's a social media term probably, and I don't know. Brooke, I'm less social media than you are. I'll guarantee you that. But anyway, yeah, you might not hear back, but you have to make that effort. So I think that would be an important thing to do if you were from an international program or a community-based program.
I agree with Tim. I think the two important points you made was seek away rotations and then seek out mentors outside your institution. But additional point I would like to make is, you know, when you are targeting the away rotations or when you are targeting the centers that you want to collaborate with remotely, do your research first. Is that the program that you would want to join for fellowship in future? If that's the case, you know, try to make up a plan. For example, if you have your project accepted for some national meeting, ACG, DDW, et cetera, reach out to those people beforehand that, hey, you know, my project got accepted, I'll be there. I'm really interested in pursuing research with you. I like what you're doing. Do you have some time to meet with me? So that's, use that opportunity for in-person meeting. Once you see somebody in person, you are more likely to forge a relationship remotely. Yes, there are a lot of research that we can do remotely. You cannot do, you know, patient related, but there are tons of opportunity. So that's just another additional comment.
So I can take the third part and the second and third part of this question, which is the visa status and being an IMG. So echoing what Dr. Gardner and Dr. Charles said, that residents at community programs can definitely match into GI fellowships, even at, you know, university programs. And that is where that first piece of being passionate about GI comes in. Because if you are passionate and you seek opportunities, you'll get them. And even if you do one research project sincerely and are deeply involved with it, and that's meaningful, that can, you know, your packet can stand out that way. Now, H-1B is really tricky because you just get 6 years on H-1B. So you have to match on your in your first attempt. Otherwise, you know, your visa comes into becomes an issue. Now, there are certain ways around it, like the national interest waiver, etc. So for those who are on H-1B, they can look into it. J1 gives you 7 years, so you do have that one extra year, which can allow you to do something like a chief year, for example, and, you know, kind of like make your packet stand out, get more time to do research, etc. So that certainly will play a role into your matching. And more now, the way the H-1B rules have been restructured, sponsoring or doing the paperwork for an H-1B is an increased cost to division, because the H-1B cost comes to the division while the J-1B cost is usually borne by the GME. So these are all technical details, but you know, that these things can certainly affect. Now, having said that, full disclosure, when I came into the US for my training, I was on an H-1B. I did a chief resident year, then I did a GI fellowship, then I did an advanced endoscopy fellowship. So I could manage everything on a H-1B visa, which was just 6 years, by, you know, just by going through different options. So there are certainly ways around doing this.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Thank you so much. I went to a very small college and remember wrestling with this when I tried to get into medical school. And I always thought at the time that, you know, my letters won't be worth anything because I'm at a small school. Nobody knows my professors. And I thought I just have to coast on really high board scores. Do you feel that that's a good idea, or is that your advice, or kind of what's your take on that? And maybe the opposite would also be true. If there are very low scores, is there like a cutoff value, or is there a number where you start getting kind of worried about a candidate's ability to handle some of the knowledge that comes with GI?
Yeah, I guess I could take that. So we get about 600 applications for our 2 fellowship spots. So we do use the board scores to kind of set a minimum level. It's a very low level board score. And you know, I don't really pay much attention to the board scores, except if there's really a drop off in the board scores. That always makes me nervous when you know the second and third steps are really quite down. So sometimes you see that, and again, when you're looking at all these applications, it's not fair, but you almost need a reason not to interview someone. So I think you have to be really cognizant of that. And I think it gets back to the point that Brooke made about doing well in your residency. I believe it was you, Brooke. Like you've got to do well in your step 2 and 3s. Like that's really, really important. I mean, step 1 is pass fail now anyway, but step 2 and 3 I think is important to do. They don't have to be 260s, but I think they have to be fairly good to make sure that you've got the clinical acumen to do GI and do internal medicine.
Anyone else want to comment on that, or we can go on to our next thing?
I think I agree with Tim. Our program also looks at the scores. And another thing that our program looks at is AOA. So, I mean, this is where there is a little bit of difficulty for IMGs because, they don't have the programs like AOA and they put that into paper. So it's just a little bit of unfair in terms of, when people are comparing. But those are the 2 things our program also look at.
Awesome. We'll move into the next question. And Antoinette, I see you on my screen, so I'm going to have you give the first answer at this. Talk to me a little bit about your pre-interview process. Like, what were you doing before the interview to make sure you nailed it on the day?
Well, I think that, and I think Dr. Glessing, I think it was you that said earlier, in my interview, I really just think of it like storytelling, and I'm kind of telling the story of kind of why I have this passion for GI and why I want, that institution to be, part of my story. And so in preparation, again, and knowing too that, and especially it's funny now as a second year fellow, thinking about when I was interviewing for GI fellowship, I was like, oh, wow, I had a lot of things going on, and still not 100% what kind of subspecialty within GI I wanted to go into, but I certainly had a passion for it all. And I think so kind of writing that passion, writing that theme of leadership, education, research, and trying then to also see, framing, the experiences I'd had to date to why, that coordinates with those themes, but then looking at the leaders and the researchers and the mentors and the educators at that institution and the work that they're doing, and then kind of taking examples from that to say, and this is why I think that this can help, that I want y'all to teach me, I want to learn from you about how I can develop in these areas. So it allowed me that kind of, space and freedom to, say, I know that this is the general direction that I want, but then I'm still, at the time, still a resident and still I'm trying to figure out kind of what direction I'm going. And that's why you need that institution to help you. So, when I kind of reframe things, not like, oh gosh, scary interview, but really that this is just a really exciting story to tell. That's kind of how I prepared.
Great. Dr. Firkins, are you able to take a stab at this also?
Yeah, definitely. I think one thing that I did for every interview, and I think Dr. Gardner mentioned this, is know who you're interviewing with. And most programs that I got interviews for, not all of them, but most of them would send out a list of who you're going to interview with. So you have a little bit of a head start to look up, what their PubMeds, what their research interests are, know their top PubMed, most cited PubMeds, what their role is within the program. And even for those programs that do not send you a list of who you're going to interview with, it's easy enough to go onto their website and see who's the program director, who are the APDs, maybe the chair, or if you've expressed, a lot of programs will also ask, what are your interests, so they can maybe hook you up with an interviewer that is in the hepatology program or the pancreatology program. So looking up, who's the head of the liver transplant program, who's the program director for advanced endoscopy at those institutions. So know who you're going to your interview with. I had a little cheat sheet next to me. I did virtual interviews during COVID, but had a little cheat sheet with me about here's a talking point. One thing I did not want to do was we all get asked a question, what questions do you have? And I did not want to have a blank, space. We all have 20-minute windows for these interviews or whatever they may be. I wanted to have my questions that were pertinent to that interviewer, that showed I did my homework, that showed I'm expressing interest in what they're doing. And I think that probably comes off well from an interviewer viewpoint.
Steve, these are my cheat sheet.
Yeah, exactly.
Points for it too.
Yeah, I also used a cheat sheet. One of my first interviews, I walked in with the chair and he said, his very first question for me was, what questions do you have? And I said, oh, I really enjoyed your speech earlier. I think I got a really good overview. It sounds like a really strong program. And he said, thanks for your time. It was a 1-minute interview of the 20 minutes. He just sent me right out. I was like, oh gosh, that was definitely the wrong answer. So after that, I would just write down for every person I interviewed with 4 or 5 questions. That way, when you're stressed and you can't come up with something clever, you've done your homework and you have it right there with you.
The one thing that I would add to this is that keep those questions as a backup. Don't get stressed about going through those questions or actually asking them. Enjoy the interview and actually explore and see if it's a good fit for you. Because if you start enjoying the interview, then organically some questions will come up. And if it's like awkward silence is when you pick up one of those questions and ask them. And I know it's like, especially virtually for some residents, it's a high anxiety process because you haven't had a chance to break the ice, you're not in the location. So, and I feel bad sometimes when some residents have those cheat sheets and they are stressed about asking a question from the cheat sheet because they don't want to take a step wrong. So I just want to tell you out there that it's okay to let your guard down a little bit, smile, relax, and just go with the flow and be organic a little bit too, and keep that as a backup.
Great advice. Dr. Gurakar, can you talk a little bit about how you prepared for the interviews?
Yeah, I think now, especially in the age of Zoom, and I don't know actually if some interviews are in person now, but I think definitely practicing with someone, kind of the Zoom format beforehand. I think when you're in person, it's easier to kind of project confidence just with the way that you're sitting or kind of your body language. But over Zoom, it's really just your face that people see and your upper body. And so I think practicing looking at the camera, and even if you think you're looking, you're making eye contact with someone over Zoom, like having someone on the opposite end of the screen say, actually, you're looking, at me versus here. Those kind of small things, which seem silly, but I think just making sure that you feel confident and, on the Zoom setting, making sure that your background is appropriate. I remember talking with a lot of my co-residents about, okay, what corner of the house or my apartment am I going to set up for this Zoom session? So making sure that you feel comfortable with your background and just kind of getting familiar with the kind of the Zoom format and making sure that you feel like you're projecting the appropriate confidence as well.
Great. So ways to make sure that you portray professionalism over Zoom. We've all had practice doing it in person, but it's a whole new world. So those are great advice. A couple more questions for the program directors. What are your thoughts about post-interview contact? And for example, somebody sending an email saying, you're in my top 5. What does that mean to you, and what do you recommend to people?
I think I can start. So personally, I think if residents, they're sending an email after the interview, and most of the panel here at Cleveland Clinic, they like that. You don't have to, declare your love and interest for a program. Honestly, you don't have to tell us you are number 1 to 5. We all understand that you are still going through the process. You have other interviews and you're not making your final decision. But all of us, we do consider that this is an appreciation that everybody took time to read your application, answer your questions, be there for you. All the programs that put in an effort to create a video. Now everything is virtual, so we create all the videos so that you can have as close to real life experience as possible about our institution, how things they go. Fellows are involved in that project. So there's some time and effort that goes into creating that kind of product for you. So we feel that, just a simple note of appreciation shows that kind of a character that, okay, you appreciated the effort that was put in by the program. You may or may not choose to rank us number one. So that's my take on that.
I mean, I 100% agree with Dr. Shahal. I think that everyone at my institution really appreciates. It certainly wouldn't be what I would consider an expectation, but I do think that it kind of just shows professionalism. I grew up in the age of actually handwriting thank you notes to all of my interviewers. So that was the age that I grew up in. And I do think it's an extra nice touch, especially as we were saying in this age of Zoom interviews, which can be kind of a little bit harder to connect with someone. It doesn't have to be long. You don't have to profess that, we are your top program. But I do think it's really important, at least for us, we all share everyone's letters with everyone. So if you're going to write a letter, you don't necessarily need to write to everyone. You could do it just to the program director or the APDs. And, I would be it's better to not write one than to write one that talks about the wrong stuff. Like I really enjoy talking about, how wonderful Pittsburgh was and it's Cleveland. We get those and that's just not great. So that would be my advice.
Dr. Chawla and Gardner, if you can express, if you can answer this last one, when people tell you you're my number one or you're my number in my top 5, what's your general response to that?
I'll let Dr. Gardner go first.
That's a tough one.
And you can also talk about the rules related to, post-interview contact. That might be good to.
Right. So you're not supposed to basically say any of this, right? You're not supposed to say you're my number. Certainly the program should never say to an applicant, you're our number one choice. I think the applicants, there's less, I think, constraint on the applicants. They probably shouldn't say it either, but you do have a lot of people say that. I think that you get pretty good at reading thank you notes, and we all understand it's a little bit of a game and how it goes. I don't feel strongly. I think that it's really important for when you write a note and you're really interested in the program to say how much you're interested in that program and why. I think it goes the extra mile to say, I'm interested in, the Cleveland Clinic because I want to work with Dr. Shahal and do research. I think that goes a long way. It's more effort. But I think it's really, really important that you do write notes. And I actually am very keen on this to people after you've interviewed. It's interesting. We finished our interviews about 3 or 4 weeks ago. And right now I'm getting thank you notes from people I interviewed 3 or 4 weeks ago. And I think it's just too via email. And I think that's too long, And I think, if you're gonna send a thank you note, you should do it in 24 hours. And just a thank you and how much you enjoyed it. And I think that's really, frankly, pretty good enough. So this is my personal bias, but I do think it's important to respond after you've been interviewed from Lee's point, because people do make a lot of effort to put these interviews on.
Mitch, there's a question in the chat, which.
Oh yeah, I can take that and we'll move on maybe to one of the last questions. So, is it possible to do a pancreatology fellowship immediately after GI? Yes, that is possible. It's usually more of a pancreatology research fellowship with some clinical experience. And actually, Dr. Gurakar may know about this. I believe they have such a pancreatology fellowship at Hopkins, is one such program that I'm aware of. But I would say spend some time online. You can reach out to some other pancreatologists or send me an email. We can certainly discuss a little bit more about that. Another thing you might consider, and this is for folks who have done training in community programs or abroad, CAPER does have a program called the CAPER Pancreas Scholars Program, which links trainees, usually in residency, with attendings who are experienced in pancreas research across the country. And I'm not aware of any international mentors, but that can be a great opportunity to get a sort of a direct mentored experience for, I think, a 12-month program. And that could be a way to get a paper and also to get a strong letter from someone at an academic institution. And with that, I'll maybe ask a couple of these last miscellaneous questions. One that I was pretty interested in was, whether participating in residency tracks like global health, if that has any effect on fellowship application. Is that something you guys see very often?
I can just make a point. We just started a global health requirement for our fellows. So we have an international health Rwandan experience where we send our third-year fellows over to Rwanda to do work with them. We have a strong relationship with the doctors in Kigali. So, again, I think this speaks to signaling, right? It speaks to like doing your homework on the program and knowing that, hey, if I was in a global health track as a resident, wow, it would be really kind of nice to have that sort of experience in a fellowship. And so I think it's just, again, like, for example, global health or a research tract or something like that may be really, really helpful. And again, it speaks to the homework that you have to do before you interview. And, how great is it to hear, from my perspective, someone who says, oh, I did a global health tract in residency. And we say, oh, well, we're going to send you to Rwanda for 3 months in your first year. If that's something you want to do. And they say, yes, it's great. And so that's a nice match that we can make. So that's just an example. But again, I think it gets to just kind of the signaling and knowing that, all the GI programs are not the same and they all do things a little bit differently.
Great. And what's your take on if there's a like a hospitalist year in between residency and applying for fellowship? Does that increase or decrease the chance of being accepted, or no difference?
I can take that. And again, it comes down to, the first point about how passionate are you about doing a fellowship. Because if you demonstrate that during the time that you've had to take a gap year, and it could be for visa, it could be for family, it could be for various reasons, if you've demonstrated that you're doing not just the hospitalist thing or whatever other gig you are in, but you're actually committed and pursuing research or doing an MPH on the side or doing something else, then that would make your packet stand out a little more than I just thought about doing GI after doing 3 years of hospitalist because I'm getting burnt out now.
Great. These last couple of questions, these are topics that we bring up a lot in the CAPER Young Investigator meetings. We do generally talk about them from the perspective of medical pancreatology or therapeutic endoscopy, but I would encourage those who are interested in learning more about the career paths within the field of GI to come to some of our next sessions. We also have recorded sessions on the CAPER YouTube page. I think the top of the page was actually Dr. Gardner from last year talking about how to match into GI fellowship. So you can hear him talk for a whole hour about GI fellowship application stuff. But with that, I will plan to wrap up. We are on the hour. Before I do, I'll just ask our panelists, are there any closing thoughts that you have or other things that you want to stress? Maybe to summarize, some of the best advice that I've heard that was new to me tonight was to really explore your passion and make sure that that comes through in the application and also on the interview day to explain kind of what brought you to the field of gastroenterology, what you hope to do within that field, and why your past experiences have prepared you to do those things. What other advice is there beyond those tips?
I think know yourself and know the programs you're applying to. That's the biggest thing.
I would agree, perfectly said.
Awesome. Well, in that case, we will wrap up. I'll stay on the call for an extra maybe 5-10 minutes. So if you're attending and you didn't have a question to answer, feel free to hit me up afterwards. Otherwise, we will be in touch from the Young Investigator Committee, and we would love to have you involved in our program moving forward. I believe there will be opportunities to get you involved in some pancreas research. which may be of interest to you and may help you in your path to becoming a GI fellow. So thanks again, everyone, for attending, and thanks so much to our panelists for taking time in the middle of interview season to be with us and to kind of spread the news of the Pancreas Young Investigator Committee. So thanks, everyone.
For having us.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you,
Thanks,
everyone.
Mitch.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.